What's the difference between accepting and embracing truth versus resisting and repudiating truth? What are the pros and the negatives in people's approach to the concept of truth? The last time we were together, we talked about the way that John uses the word truth as he writes the Gospel of John and then 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. In his account of the life of Jesus in the Gospel of John, 25 times he uses the noun, the Greek noun for truth. He uses it 20 times in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. We talked about several of those statements that were made and finally ended with a statement that was made by Jesus and then a retort by Pilate in John chapter 18. Even read a comment from an individual that wrote a commentary in 1943, which was an astute observation about the mindset of Pilate and of those of his day. I want to begin with that same passage and then take a look at another commentary, and then let's talk about these positives and negatives. Here's that setting again. Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priest have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to the Jews, "I find no fault in him at all." So we talked about a comment that was made by R.C.H. Linsky in a commentary he wrote on the Gospel of John. It was published in 1943. Another author writing a commentary on that same passage. And this is what he says. What is truth? The question of Pilate does not deal with absolute truth, the truth as one, of which the Lord had spoken, but simply with truth in any particular case. There is nothing of real reverence or seriousness in his words, still less of awe. He does not shape, even in passing thought, a subject for earnest inquiry, but half sadly, half cynically, implies that even in ordinary matters truth is unattainable. It was so evidently to his mind in the matter before him, but so much at least was plain to his Roman clearness of vision, that the prisoner accused by his countrymen was no political intriguer. He therefore impatiently breaks off the examination which had, as he fancied, shown him enough to decide the case, that he may obtain the release of Jesus, if possible. The mindset, half sadly, half cynically, implies that even in ordinary matters, truth is unattainable. The writer of the commentary, an individual named B.F. Westcott, printed in London, 1890. It's one of the older books I have in my library. And we mentioned previously that this idea of denigrating truth is something that has been raging very visibly in our culture for decades, if not longer. It goes back later than that. Westcott dealt with it in the 1800s in England. Pilate has that kind of mindset in the 1st century. Why are people so against fact? Why are people against something that falls into the category of truth? Using this passage in John 18 as a stepping stone, and there's one other passage in John I want to talk to in the time we have together as well. But this idea of what is truth and the way that one responds to it, what does it actually do? I'd like to talk about several things that were written by the Apostle Paul in this kind of concept of the negative aspects of people that denigrate truth, that resist truth, that repudiate truth. When Paul writes to the Christians in the city of Rome, in Romans chapter 1, he writes this in verse 18. "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." Men who suppress the truth. That's something he's writing about in the 1st century. I have seen a lot of that take place in 2020. So have you, in years previous to that. He's not finished. Down in verse 25 of this same chapter, he talks about individuals who exchanged the truth of God for the lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Individuals who suppress the truth in unrighteousness and exchange truth for a lie. Well, they see that in their best interest. Really, it's not. They're just not intellectually honest enough to recognize it. In the book of Galatians, in Galatians chapter 5, there's another statement really that's involved in this kind of idea. He writes to these Christians in the province of Galatia, "You ran well, who hindered you from obeying the truth?" And there are a couple of things involved just in that simple statement and simple question. Number one, you've been stopped. There's obstacles that have been put in your way. Somebody is trying to hinder you from following fact, from dealing with things that you know actually to be true. Somebody has hindered you from obeying the truth. There are obstacles in the way, which makes, in another point, sometimes that truth difficult to embrace because of what you feel will be repercussions against you if you actually do. Let's go from this particular passage to the Christians in Galatia to Paul writing to one individual by the name of Timothy. In 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 8, he talks about individuals in the Old Testament who resisted Moses. And so people also do today. They resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds disapproved concerning the faith. Negative response: I'm going to resist it. I'm going to suppress it. I'm not going to think anything positive about it at all because it doesn't fit my narrative. I'm going to resist the truth. Chapter 4 of 2 Timothy, verse 4, individuals that will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned to fables. Don't want to listen. Don't confuse me with facts. I've already made up my mind. There's a point of view that I must express. And even though it's erroneous, I'm still going to hold on to it tenaciously. How intelligent does that sound? People that fight against fact, people that fight against truth, people that pull verses out of their context and build a whole particular doctrine around something that really is incorrect, that the Bible really doesn't support. And that's been taking place for millennia. What about the positive aspect? What happens in a positive way? Let's go back to John chapter 8. We talked about it briefly the last time we were together. John chapter 8, verse 31 and 32, Jesus makes a statement about the importance of truth. He's stating this to the Jews that believed in him. If you abide in my word, you're my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. From a positive standpoint, know it, investigate it, analyze it, take a look at all sides of the coin, all sides of the problem, all related questions to that particular subject. Know the truth. And that involves not turning my view away from something that I really do not want to consider. You shall know the truth shall make you free. Something that Paul writes to Christians in a different city, this time the city of Thessalonica, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. A statement's made in verse 9 and verse 10. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, lying wonders, with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. It's not enough to know it. I've got to apply it. I've got to appreciate it. And the phrase that Paul uses here, individuals that did not love the truth, they loved things that were false. They loved unrighteousness. They loved their way of approaching life. They were not about to bend their life to fit what God's law actually states, the principles that need to be found in the life of the child of God. And as you continue The statement's made in verse 12. They all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness, which builds upon the statement that he makes in verse 10. So these individuals are individuals that do not love the truth and they do not believe the truth. They haven't embraced it. They haven't viewed it as something that really needs to be accepted. On the other hand, if you know the truth, the positive aspects of that are you appreciate it and love the truth. You actually embrace it in such a way that you believe in the truth. Let's go back to what Paul writes to Timothy one more time. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. The statement is a very familiar statement to a lot of biblical students. The older King James said, "Study to show yourself approved unto God." New King James words it this way: "Be diligent to present yourselves approved to God, a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth." At Cherokee Hills, we talked about it on several occasions. The only time you find this particular word that's translated rightly dividing is here. It's not used anyplace else in the New Testament. It really points to the background, the vocation that the Apostle Paul had. He had been trained as a Pharisee, but as far as his vocation, he was a tent maker. And the meaning of this word rightly divine literally means, if you look it up in the lexicon, the Greek-English lexicon, it means cut right on the line. It illustrates so much his vocation of a tent maker. And for any seamstress, that makes perfect sense as well. If you put a pattern over a piece of material and you cut inside the pattern, you've ruined the pattern. You've ruined the material. And no matter what you try to sew together, it's not going to be correct. On the other hand, if you put the pattern on that material and cut way outside of the pattern, you've wasted material. What you sew again will not look right. It's not going to be correct. What Paul writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:15 is cut truth right on the line. Recognize the difference, the differentiating line between what is right and what is wrong. Cut right on that line. Do not find yourself filtering over to things that are false, unverified, fanciful, wrong. I want you to rightly divide the word of truth. I've got to be aware of it. I need to know it. I need to embrace it. I appreciate the purpose of it. I love it. I'm going to believe that truth. And I'm not going to waste my time by seeing where truth and falsity actually occur and then jump from one side to the other, back and forth and back and forth. Again, what he writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, this kind of idea of being watchful, he makes a statement in verse 5, "Be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of your ministry." You can't do that if you do not embrace and appreciate truth. There's a statement that Peter makes. You find it in 1 Peter chapter 1, towards the end of that chapter. And the statement's made in verse 22, "Since you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit in sincere love of the brethren, love one another fervently with a pure heart." The phrase, obeying the truth, there is the application of it. It's not just enough to know it. It's not just enough to love it. Not even just enough to believe it. And if I can actually differentiate between what is right and what is wrong, there's more involved than just cutting right on the line. I've got to apply it. I've got to follow things that are true, not things that are false, not things that really are wishful thinking. Our culture and our generation in these United States has become very adept at following wishful thinking. Truth is viewed as relative and subjective, just like Pilate and those in that pagan Roman society. Humanity really has not changed. The message of God's Word still is timeless. Embrace truth. Accept truth. Analyze every detail that you can. And ultimately obey what is right. Repudiate what is wrong. Interesting advice. Tremendous topic. Please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.